This is SILL Talks, episode 23. Hello, Star Architects. Welcome to another wonderful episode of the SILL Talks Podcast, the platform dedicated to helping architects and creatives build businesses that are profitable and sustainable. As always, guys, I'm your host, Egbeiyon Leonard. And one thing I know for sure is that clients don't just wake up in the morning and say, today I will disrespect an architect. Nobody plans it. What clients do is they respond to the version of the architect that shows up. And that is a difficult thing to admit, especially in our climate here in Africa. Because many of us were raised personally and professionally to be humble people. We were taught to respect our elders, avoid confrontation, manage situations, or offend anybody, and don't be overly confident. You even hear things like pride comes before a fall. Now, these are good values, to be very honest, but nobody taught us how to balance humility with authority. So we enter practice with good intentions and weak positioning. We rush to do drawings. We start work even before contracts are defined. We redesign again and again because it is just a small change now. We say, let's manage it, instead of saying, here's how it works. And then, almost inevitably, clients say, architect, calm down. It's just a drawing. Oh, just a drawing. That drawing is the difference between a building that is standing for decades and one cracking down after a few rainy seasons. So, how did something so important become so casual? It didn't happen overnight, of course. It happened through behavior. Now, this episode is not about blaming clients. No. Clients behave logically. They respond to boundaries, confidence, and clarity most of the time. Now, if there are no boundaries, they push. If leadership is unclear, someone else most times will fill that gap. And very often, architects, even when we don't mean to, we create that gap ourselves. Let me do a bit of comparison to something it must be uncomfortable, but it's what it is. Doctors don't ask patients how much diagnosis should cost. Or lawyers say, pay me whenever you're ready. But as architects, we say, let's start first. We'll sort it out later. And later never actually comes. Later becomes unpaid fees. Later becomes endless redesigns. And sometimes it becomes frustration disguised as passion. So the real question is not, why don't clients take architects seriously? Which this episode is about, by the way. The real question is, what version of the architect have you been presenting? So in this episode, I'm going to talk honestly, not academically, about why clients don't take architects seriously and how architects can begin to reclaim that authority without becoming arrogant, rude, or disconnected from our dear culture. Now, this is not about shouting at clients. It's about leading the process. So stay with me as I break it down. And point of note, this may be a slightly long episode, so you can pause and rewind as you please. So let's get into it. To understand how we got here, we need to start with something that sounds positive, but has quietly cost many architects their authority. Humility. Let's talk about humility. The humility trap in our architectural practice. Most architects in Nigeria or even Africa did not enter practice trying to be weak, unsure, or invincible. No, in fact, many of us entered practice trying to be good, good people. We were taught things like respect our elders, don't argue too much, be humble, let your work speak for you. And those are good values. They are good values, to be honest. The problem is what happens when humility is never balanced with authority. Because humility without authority slowly turns into silence. And silence in professional spaces is very, very expensive. So I'll paint a very familiar picture. You walk into a meeting. Maybe the client is older than you. Of course, most of the guys who are going to do projects that you do will probably be older than you if you are a young chap like me. Or maybe they brought their uncle, who is usually going to be the contractor. You greet everyone politely, right? You wait for permission to speak. You listen, you nod, and when it's finally your turn, you explain your point calmly, or sometimes even maybe too calmly, and then someone cuts in on you as you're talking. Architect, calm down now, don't overcomplicate things. We have done this before. And what do? You retreat. Now, that retreat is not because you don't know your job, but because you don't want to look rude. You don't want to offend anybody. You don't want to lose the job, so you manage it. That word manage again. In our noble profession, let's manage it has ended more professional authority than many bad clients ever did. Because managing it usually means letting things slide, avoiding difficult conversations, hoping that respect will come along the way. But the truth is, respect does not come later. It comes at the beginning. And many clients don't dominate architects because they are powerful or they have connections. Sometimes that might be the case, but most times they dominate because the architect entered the room already shrinking. And this is not a weakness. It is mental conditioning. Now think about how many of us were trained in school. You don't challenge the lecturer, do you? You don't question too much. Or you don't even talk back because it's considered rude. And then you graduate and suddenly you're expected to lead a room filled with money, ego, pressure and fear. Nobody teaches that transition. So student humility then enters professional spaces. And clients can feel it like shark can smell blood in water. In many meetings, the architect is the only professional who keeps apologizing. Oh, sorry for the delay. Sorry for asking. Sorry, just one more question. Have you ever noticed that? Even the contractor doesn't apologize for delays like that. The engineers don't apologize for instructions. But the architect apologizes for everything, even for his existence. And over time, the room responds accordingly. And this is where humility trap lives. Because humility starts as respect. But without structure, it turns into permission. Permission for clients to push your deadlines, delay payment, ignore your advice, and treat drawings like they are favours. And here's the irony. The architect is usually the person in the room carrying the most long-term responsibility. If the building cracks today, it's you they will remember. If the building approval fails because of the many changes and all, it is you they will call. If something goes wrong in 10 years, your name is still on that drawing. Yet, in the moment, you are treated like the quiet one. Why? Because authority is not assumed, it is demonstrated. And in many African contexts, authority is not given to the most intelligent person in the room. No, it is given to the clearest person. Now, clarity beats politeness in professional settings. I'll say it again for those sitting at the back. Clarity beats politeness. You can be respectful and be firm. You can be humble and be directive. You can be culturally grounded and professionally immovable. And when humility makes you unclear, client steps into that vacuum. Not because they are bad people, but because that's what humans do. Humans fill vacuums. And that's why you hear things like, I've already told the mason what to do. The engineer said it's fine. Let's not involve drawings on this one. They are not disrespecting you, my guy. To be honest, they are responding to the versions of you that never clearly claimed leadership. Many architects avoid authority because they confuse it with arrogance. So they choose comfort over clarity. And comfort is expensive. Because the same client that calls you nice today will underpay you tomorrow. This is not bitterness, it's observation. Authority does not mean shouting. It does not mean disrespect. It does not mean losing your culture. Authority simply means this is how the process works. This is where my responsibility starts and ends. This is the consequences of this decision. That is it. And until architects learn to separate humility from silence, because they are two different things, clients will continue to take advantage of us. Not maliciously, of course, but naturally. Because human beings follow structure. They don't follow intentions. Your intentions is in your mind, but structures is something that is laid down. So before we start talking about pricing, or before we talk about drawings, or we talk about contracts, we have to unlearn the idea that being taken seriously requires being aggressive. No, it requires being clear. And here's the transition. Stay with me. Once humility removes authority, something else quietly starts to happen. Architects begin to train clients even without knowing it. And now I'll talk about that next. Because many clients behave the way they do, not because they are difficult, but because we taught them to. So I'll look at how we train clients, without even knowing it. Most architects think clients come into projects being difficult or disrespectful or already unreasonable. But in many cases, they aren't. They learned it. Clients are trained. And I've said this time and time again in many of my episodes. Clients are trained. You teach them how to treat you. And often, very, very often, they are trained by us, the architects. Not intentionally. Of course, you can do it intentionally, but we train them unintentionally, not maliciously, and not consistently. Every profession trains its clients. Doctors train patients to wait. Lawyers train clients to respect process. Accountants train clients to submit documents on time. Architects, we often train our clients that deadlines are flexible. Payments can wait. Scope is elastic as a rubber band. And drawings are negotiable. And we do it quietly through behavior. Let's look at a familiar situation. A client calls you and says, "Architect, just do something small first. Let me see." You know that line now, just something small. So you open your laptop, you tell yourself, "I'll just do a sketch. Let me show goodwill." Goodwill. You send something, the client replies, "Okay, just adjust this small thing." You adjust it. Then he says, "Can we try another option?" Before you know it, you have redesigned that building 3 times. No contract, no payment, no just vibes. At that point, the client has learned something very important from you. This architect will work first. And once that lesson is learned, it sticks. Let's take a pause there and take out some things. The client did not force you. The client did not threaten you. You volunteered. And that is how training happens. Slowly and politely. Now let's even take this to site. You notice something wrong. You mention it calmly to the contractor. The contractor shrugs his shoulders and says, "Oh guy, it's fine. A small thing." Then the client says, "Architect, don't worry, we'll manage it. The engineer has looked at it." Next week, the same thing happens again. But because last time nothing happened, when you mentioned anything, there was no consequences. So the system learned architect's instructions are negotiable. This isn't wickedness, it is pattern recognition. Human repeat what works. Same thing with payments. The client delays, you don't want to disturb them, you keep working. Weeks later, they pay, maybe even half safe. And what have they learned? That work continues without payment, that there is no urgency, that payment is a favor and not a requirement for their work. So next time, they delay again, not because they hate you, but because environment allows it. And here's the painful part. Most architects do this because they are afraid of losing the job, afraid of being replaced, afraid of being called difficult. So they trade long-term authority for short-term comfort. And clients sense this uncertainty. And that's why you hear things like, "Other architects don't behave like this now. My previous architect didn't charge me this much now." In short, I hear it all the time. Those are comparisons. Clients compare environments and they choose the one that favors them. So if disrespect keeps repeating itself, at some point one might want to admit it may not be the client, it may be our systems. And our systems are designed. And so here's the good news. What is trained can be retrained. But retraining requires discomfort, of course, clear scope, clear boundaries, and clear pauses where payment delays. Yes, you may lose some clients. I say this with audacity. You will lose some clients. But the clients who leave because your structure were never going to respect you anyway. And once clients get used to flexibility, something happens. They stop seeing architects as decision makers and start seeing us as drawing providers, which takes us straight to my next point. Because one of the biggest reasons architects are not taken seriously in Nigeria is that we present drawings instead of decisions. So I'll talk about drawings for a moment. Because this is where many architects unknowingly lose authority. Most clients don't disrespect architects intentionally. They simply think our job is to draw. And if we are being honest, we help them arrive at that conclusion. Think about how most projects begin. Architect, let me see something. Just send me a sketch. Let me see the plan first. And we rush, we open our laptops, we start drawing before asking hard questions, before defining the real problem, before explaining the consequences. So the client sees a drawing before they see your thinking. And once that happens, the client assumes, oh, this is what I'm paying for. I'm paying for a file. I'm paying for a plan. I'm paying for a drawing. And that's why later, when you now try to explain, that some things won't work that way, the client is confused and like, but you already drew it now. Now, here's the difference. Drawings feel light while decisions feel heavy. Drawings feel editable while decisions feel final. Now, clients respect weight. They respect the person who says, if you move this wall, here is what it will cost you. Something will give. If you ignore this, your approval may not scale through. If we change this structure will be affected. Now, that point of view is called authority. And when architects lead with drawings, we reduce ourselves to operators. And that's why clients send messages like, architect, just move this wall small to the left, or shift the staircase to a different position, or change the toilet position, I don't like it. As if they are rearranging furniture. Because to them, it's just lines. They don't see the structure, they don't see the service, they don't see the costs, they don't see the consequences. And they don't see it because we didn't position ourselves as decision guides. We positioned ourselves as drawing vendors. And the truth is this: the person who controls decisions controls respect. The person who executes instructions is replaceable. So architecture is not just drawings. Drawing is a tool. Architecture is judgment. Until clients experience your judgment before your drawings, they will never fully take you seriously. So this isn't about drawing less. No, don't get me wrong. It's about leading with thinking. Lead with questions, lead with consequences, lead with options and trade-offs. And then let the drawing support the decision, not replace it. And once architects are seen as drawing vendors, something else happens. They start pricing like vendors. And vendors, we all know, are negotiated. So let's talk about pricing like vendors and pricing like advisors. I'll start with pricing. The moment many architects lose authority is the moment they price like vendors. You hear questions like, architect, how much? Can we adjust the fee small? And instead of leading the conversation, we follow it. We ask, what's your budget? And once that question comes out of your mouth, woof, the frame is set. The client is no longer asking, what is it worth? They are asking, how cheap can this be? And in our environment, once price becomes flexible, respect follows it down. Doctors don't ask patients how much diagnosis should cost. Lawyers don't negotiate legal risk. But architects, we apologize for our own fees. We discount before being asked. We add it inside the building cost. So clients conclude something simple. This service is optional, and optional things are negotiated. Advisors anchor value before price. Vendors defend price after value. You see the difference? When you explain what your work prevents, approvals, delays, structural mistakes, cost overrun, pride becomes context, not argument. But when price comes first, everything becomes a negotiation. And clients will push, not because they are wicked, but because the systems allows them to. Once architects price like vendors, they are treated like vendors. And we all know that vendors are replaceable. which is why the next point I will discuss is also very crucial, because pricing problems are often tied to something even more dangerous, and I'm sure you already know. We're talking about familiarity, friendship, and favours, right? In our environment, friendship quietly destroys more professional authority than pricing ever could. My friend is the client. My uncle knows him. We go to the same church. Let's just start, we'll sort it out. I'm sure any of these statements I just made is very familiar to many of us. And at the beginning, everything feels smooth, no contract, no invoice pressure, just trust, or just vibe, if I should say it, until money enters the conversation. And the funny thing, money will always enter the conversation. That's when things will change. Suddenly, the boundaries feels awkward, invoice now feels rude, follow-up, feels like you are begging. And the architect starts managing emotions instead of managing the project. And the truth is, friendship without structure is not kindness, it is confusion. Clients don't disrespect architects because they are close to them. No, on the contrary, they disrespect architects because closeness replaces clarity. Like I have always said, and I've said this again and again in most of my podcasts, professional systems don't destroy relationships, they simply protect it. If your relationship cannot survive structure, it will not survive money. And again, the moment you remove structure in the name of friendship, you downgrade yourself from a professional to a favor giver. And favors are not respected, they are consumed. That's why you will hear people say, architects, no stress now. We'll balance you later. We are family. And family does not replace process. And once you accept favor positioning, it becomes difficult to reintroduce authority. Which brings us to the next issue again. Because when boundaries exist, many architects avoid something critical, speaking up. So I'm talking about silence, just in case, and avoiding conflict, and how this affects and erodes our authority. Silence in itself, oh boy, many creatives think silence is professionalism. We think if I keep quiet, I'm being mature. If I don't argue, I'm being respectful. If I avoid conflict, the project will move smoothly. Nah, lie. But silence does not protect authority. Nah, it erodes it. Think about site meetings. You see something wrong. Setback is off. The reinforcement doesn't match the drawing. The staircase feels awkward or wrong. You notice it immediately, right? But you hesitate. You don't want to embarrass anyone. You don't want to slow things down. You don't want to look like you are a funny, tough guy. So you say it softly, or you say it later, or sometimes you don't even say it at all. And then someone else speaks louder. The contractor explains it. The engineer weighs it off. The client says, if they say it's fine, then it's fine. And just like that, your authority disappears from the room. Not because you were wrong, but because you were quiet. And the hard truth is, in professional spaces, silence is not interpreted as wisdom. It is interpreted as uncertainty. Clients don't respect the person who sees risk but doesn't name it. They respect the person who explains consequences clearly, even when it's not comfortable for them. Avoiding conflict feels peaceful in the moment, but in the greater scheme of things, it is chaos. Because when things go wrong, silence offers no protection. They will still remember your name. Authority is not about being loud. It is about being clear in the right moment. And once silence becomes a habit, clients stop listening to you. Even when you are finally speaking, they won't even hear you. Which brings me to a very decisive issue. Because even when architects speak, even when boundaries are set, respect still collapses if one thing is missing. And that thing is simple: consequences. Consequences is where respect either becomes real or remains something in the books. Many architects set boundaries. They speak clearly. They explain processes, but nothing changes. Why? Because boundaries without consequences are just suggestions. Think about payment. The client delays. You remind them politely. You explain calmly. But you keep working. What has the system learned? That your payment is optional. Not because the client is bad, but because nothing happens when they delay. Same thing goes with scope. You agree on 3 options. The client asks for 5 more. You simply sigh and you do it. No reset, no variation, no pause. So the system learns scope is elastic. And simple fact is, the first time a boundary is crossed and nothing happens, that boundary has disappeared. Clients don't test boundaries because they are wicked or they mean to. No. They test because humans test systems generally. And systems only work when consequences are consistent. Another point to note is that if work continues when payment stops, payment will always stop first. Every time. I've seen this happen again and again. If drawings are, released before approval will always come later. Right? Now, if instructions are ignored without consequences, they will keep being ignored. This is simple. This is not personal. It is structural. Respect does not come from how well you explain your boundaries to your clients. Nah. It comes from what happens when those boundaries are crossed. And this is where many architects still struggle in 2026, because enforcing consequences feels uncomfortable. It feels harsh. It feels confrontational. It feels like you are risking the relationship. But the irony is that a relationship that only survives when you abandon structure was never built on respect now. So consequences don't destroy good clients. They filter out the bad ones that you don't need. And once consequences enter the system, something interesting begins to happen. Clients begin to adjust. Why? Because humans always adjust to systems that work. It's the same clear example of the Nigerian system. We have people misbehaving here, they are in political offices doing stuff, and they have 50 million followers who are carrying their toothpick, their handbag, and helping them comb their hair. But let them travel to a system that works. They adjust and pack their bag themselves. So this brings me to the final reflection. Because when you put all these pieces together, humility, training, drawings, pricing, friendship, silence, consequences, a pattern emerges. And that pattern tells us one thing. The problem is not architecture. The problem is positioning. So, before we close, let me do a quick recap, because it seems like I've been talking for over 20 hours. Because this episode covered a lot. It deserves to be brought together properly. If you listen carefully, everything I have talked about points to one thing. It was never just one problem. It was not just humility. It was not just pricing. It was not just drawings. It was not just the clients. It was a pattern. I talked about how humility, when not balanced with authority, turns into silence, right? How silence slowly trains clients to push. How flexible behavior teaches clients that processes are optional. How leading with drawings reduce architects to operators instead of decision makers. And how, pricing like a vendor invites negotiation instead of respect. How friendship without structure turns professions into a favor giver. How avoiding conflict removes your voice from the room. How boundaries without consequences collapse completely. Different issues, all of them, but the same root: positioning. Clients don't respond to intentions, they respond to structures. They do not respond to how hard you work as an architect. They respond to what your systems allow. And over time, many architects, without even meaning to, including myself, have positioned ourselves as helpful, flexible, and accommodating, but not authoritative. So clients adjust, not because they are wicked, not because they hate architects, but because humans always adapt to the environment they are in. And that is the uncomfortable truth we need to hear. This episode is not a call to be aggressive. It's not a call to shout at clients or to misbehave. It's not a call to abandon our humility. It's a call to be clear. To be clear about your role, to be clear about your process, to be clear about the value you are bringing, right? To be clear about the boundaries you allow your clients to operate within, and to be clear about the consequences that come with it. Because respect in professional practice is not emotional, it is simply structural. You don't gain respect by working harder. You gain respect by working clearer. You don't gain authority by explaining more. You gain authority by enforcing consistently. And this is the shift that changes everything. That moment you stop presenting yourself as a drawing provider and start showing up as a decision maker, the room begins to shift for you. The moment you stop managing discomfort and start leading the process, the clients adjust. Not all clients, of course, I must say this with all sense of truthfulness, but the right ones will adjust. And the clients who leave because of clarity, we're never going to respect you anyway. So let's end where we began. Clients don't wake up and decide to disrespect architects. Nah, they respond to the version of the architect that shows up. And that means the real question was never, why don't clients take architects seriously? The real question is, what version of the architects have you been presenting? And what version do you need to redesign? Now, that redesign doesn't start with the client. It starts with us. This is the SILL Talks Podcast, and I am your humble host, Architect Egbeiyon Leonard. Now, if this episode resonated with you in some way or the other, please share it. Share it with another architect or a creative who needs to hear this. Until next time, design with clarity, design with confidence, price with confidence, and lead the process. See you in the next conversation. Bye.